Alright, so we are at our War on Terror scenario. So it is fall of 2001 now. And the United States and the Arab states are at war again. The United States has to invade and control Afghanistan and Iraq. Well, they don't start at the exact same time. Afghanistan starts first, and then 4 turns later, Iraq war starts. But there's the Arab state forces in Afghanistan. There is the American force that is going to be invading Afghanistan. And then in a couple turns, there's the Iraq side of things. The American forces staged in Turkey, and the Iraqi forces in Iraq. They're going to try to stop them. We'll see how that goes. And everyone else will just be building or upgrading. There are some new things that will be coming out. The Osprey transport plane, unique unit for the Americans. It's a air transport that is VTOL, so it can has the utility of a helicopter, and that it's VTOL, it can land anywhere, but it has the range of a fixed wing. So best of both worlds. And then America will be able to start producing stealth planes. So stealth fighter, stealth tactical bomber, stealth strategic bomber. And then drones will start making their appearance. So we'll do the first turn, maybe the first second turn, and we'll come back with what happened. See you then. Alright, we're in the spring of 2002. And I will just go straight to Afghanistan because everyone else is just upgrading stuff. So as you can see, the Afghanistan map looks very different. The United States, using its very large Chinook fleet, landed in this northern province of Afghanistan with Marines and SEAL units, and backed up by a buttload of air power. There's actually more air power than what's currently sitting there, but actually those have to move. Forgot to move those. Anyways, they took this province with no losses, and then the Arab states, with everything they had in Afghanistan, launched a counterattack, and it was completely obliterated. Not to say the Americans didn't take losses too. There was originally 4 Marines, 2 SEAL units, and 2 attack helicopters in there. Now it's down to 1 Marine and 1 attack helicopter. But the United States used its strongest asset, the ace up its sleeve, brought in its overwhelming air power, and well, you see the results. The Arab state foreign fighter role was a 5, so they got 5 foreign fighters that they've kind of spread out to try to create some sort of front line. So Afghanistan is kind of after the first round is in a stalemate. Neither side has the strength to attack the other at the moment. So it's going to be who can get the reinforcements to Afghanistan faster. But in furthering that goal, the United States put out its new unit, the Osprey. It's put out a whole fleet of them. It's going to replace its Chinook fleet with the Ospreys. It's a much more powerful air transport unit, can transport 2 infantry or 1 artillery instead of the Chinooks just 1, and has a much greater range. You know, the Chinooks have a range of 2, Ospreys have a range of 6. And they're VTOL capable, so they are capable of operating from the United States' AACs, or amphibious assault carriers. And then it upgraded half of its B-52 fleet with the new B-2 stealth bombers. So that gives the United States the capability to go after infrastructure like factories with complete impunity, because it's stealth, so it is immune to anti-aircraft fire, so it can go after enemy factories without having to worry about any aircraft fire. So that is a huge advantage. The only way that America's stealth bombers can be targeted is by fighter jet intercept. And that was it for the turn, so we will come back next turn. Alright, the fall of 2002, and the first batch of drones are on the way to Afghanistan. Those are, for now, they're just reconnaissance drones. So what they do is they allow, if there's a reconnaissance drone in the territory, allows the infantry to ignore terrain penalties, so like mountains or whatnot. So that'll be very useful for Afghanistan, considering it's nothing but mountains. But the new Ospreys, transporting the next batch of infantry reinforcements for Afghanistan. And then in Afghanistan, the Arab states were not able to attack the U.S. position in Afghanistan, even though it's critically low on manpower, because the United States launched a combination of B-52s doing carpet bombings and cruise missile attacks, which reduced the foreign fighters down to 2, and then there was the 7 wounded from previous turn that came over from Iran. And so with just 9 infantry, that wasn't enough strength to assault the American position. As they did, America would pull in a whole buttload of air power, and a good chunk of that has first strike, so half of that 9 infantry would have been dead before they even managed to get a shot off, and the other half would have been obliterated soon after. So the Arab states opted to just conserve its strength and just reinforce, not attack. Especially when the United States has 12 infantry that will be landed by those Ospreys this coming turn. So so that was it for the turn, so we'll come back next turn. Alright, this is spring of 2003, and the United States shifted some air assets from Afghanistan back over to Turkey in preparation for the invasion of Iraq, which is coming very soon. But the war in Iraq still stalemated. The United States still building up its forces. It landed 12 infantry using its Ospreys this turn, and the Arab state forces haven't been able to build up enough numbers, enough mass to attack the Americans, because the Americans have been conducting B-52 and cruise missile strikes that have prevented them from building up enough mass to hit that and attack that. What I forgot to mention last video is the Americans start building an air base, which they've completed, and now that that air base is completed, that will allow the United States, once Baghdad is taken, because Baghdad has an air base as well, that will allow the United States to fly in heavy air transports and allow the United States to start flying in heavy stuff, so like mechanized infantry and main battle tanks and whatnot. Give the Americans in Afghanistan substantially more firepower. Not to mention, it'll allow the United States, if it so chooses, to station fixed-wing aircraft in Afghanistan. So, like, F-22s or F-35s or F-16s or F-15s or whatever it wants to station in there. That's pretty much it. Some pretty quick turns. But the new thing for this turn is the war expands into Iraq, so the United States will be able to invade Iraq this turn. So we will see how that goes. So we'll see you then with the post-invasion of Iraq. Alright, we're at the fall of 2003. And the United States has invaded Iraq, so it took that extreme northern territory. And next they'll be pushing into Baghdad to capture that air base. And because once they got that air base, that'll allow the United States to fly in heavy air transports and start bringing some heavy assets over to Afghanistan, like tanks and artillery and mechanized infantry and whatnot. The Arab states took extremely heavy casualty. They lost most of their military in that attack. It just got the handful of stuff in Baghdad and then built some stuff in Iran with that factory and what they got back from wounded. The United States took some decent casualties. They lost about half of their infantry in the attack. But, the United States have been focusing on upgrading their Air Force, so we got F-22s and F-35s. Afghanistan, the United States didn't do anything. Still just continuing to build up its forces. About all they did in Afghanistan was a series of cruise missile attacks. It did some damage, but that was about it. Let's So we will come back next turn with probably the fall of Baghdad. See you then. Alright, we're at spring 2004, and the US has just captured Baghdad. And it's important because it cuts the Arab states off from a factory, but it gives the U.S. a factory which will allow the United States to get forces to the Middle East much faster. They don't have to come all the way across the Atlantic. And with the Ospreys have made their turn trips, they're going to be picking up all that infantry and taking it to Afghanistan. The United States is still playing defense in Afghanistan. They haven't pushed out of that initial province yet, but that will soon to change because that's 12 infantry that's going to be dropping off, but more importantly, with the Baghdad airport now open, excuse me, my phone's going off. But they'll be able to use heavy air transport to start flying in, like every other turn, tanks and mechanized units every other turn. So very soon we'll start seeing the United States pushing out of Afghanistan. So we'll come back with next update. We're in the fall of 2004, and America, aside from the cruise missile strikes and B-52 bombing runs, didn't do any attacks, just continuing to wait for more forces to arrive before they launch any major attack. Next turn, Afghanistan will get a big infusion of new infantry. And with the United States capturing that factory in Baghdad, that is allowing the United States to get forces to Iraq a lot quicker. The Arab states did try attacking the Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan using foreign fighters, and it was a total disaster on both ends. American air power is just too damn strong. Iraq, they didn't even get a single hit, and the entire foreign fighter force was obliterated. In Afghanistan, it was a little better. They managed to get 2 hits before they were completely obliterated, but the United States got both of those infantry back as wounded. So the final score is the Arab states lost 7 infantry to 0 losses on the U.S. side, so that was painful. The Arab states are trying to build up a new army, but that's a very uphill battle because remember the last section, America's B-52 bomber strike completely wiped out everything in here but 1 infantry, so so it's rough. But that was it for that turn, so we'll come back in spring of 2005 and we'll see what happens then. Alright, we're at the spring of 2005. And United States just continuing cruise missile strikes and B-52 bombing runs to keep the Arab state and foreign fighter numbers down and manageable. The United States is continuing to bring forces over from the East Coast over to Iraq. To one, to build up more mass, and two, it's still having to upgrade its military in the middle of all this. So, but the haven't decided yet whether or not if the United States is strong enough to go on the offensive in Iraq. Might still hold off on that. America moved its B-2 Spirit stealth bombers to Germany. They're continuing to bring more stuff over to Iraq. But Afghanistan is a different story. I think Afghanistan, they've built up enough mass for the United States to go on the offensive in Afghanistan. So, probably do that this turn. Other than that, that's about it. So we'll come back with the new offensive in Afghanistan. Alright, we're in the fall of 2005. And over here in Iraq, the United States is still sticking with cruise missile and B-52 strikes. Which did a reasonable amount of damage, but the United States is going to have to go on the ground assault sooner rather than later before these foreign fighters build up to ridiculous numbers. But still waiting on replacing some of the older tech before they go on a continued ground invasion. But over here, you can see the Ospreys are on the return trip to the west coast to pick up the next wave of infantry. As you can see, in Afghanistan, the United States went on the offensive, took 3 provinces, to Herat, Central Highlands, and Kattegat. Was also the first real use of drones, and drones allows the attacking infantry to ignore terrain modifiers. So, despite this all being mountain, the United States infantry is able to attack at its full potential instead of the -1 for mountainous terrain. Well, that goes for all ground assets, tanks included, so that was a big help. But that's about it so far. I will come back with the next end of turn results. See you then. Alright, we're at the spring of 2006, and the only action the Americans took was cruise missile strikes and B-52 bombing runs, which did abysmally. Only managed to get a handful of hits, and then the Arab states got most of that back and wounded. Primary action was in Iraq, where the Arab states and their foreign fighters attacked the American position here in Kurdistan. They probably could have wiped out, taken the American position, but the massive response by American air power would have ensured, well, it did, and would have ensured pretty massive casualties on the Arab states' part, and it would have been huge losses for one territory that they were going to immediately lose the next turn, because America has all of that sitting in Baghdad, directly to the south of Kurdistan. So, yeah, it would have taken out some American hardware, some fairly expensive American hardware, but America has the production to absorb those costs really easily, and so the Arab states, after a single dice roll, decided to withdraw. They had already taken twice as many casualties as the U.S. did, so it decided to withdraw to preserve its troop strength, because ultimately for the Arab states to win, they just have to control, half the territory. In Afghanistan, the only attacks that were made were by the Americans doing cruise missile and B-52 strikes, and that did abysmally. Did better than Iraq, but it still did abysmally. Only got a couple hits. Other than that, both sides opted to just reinforce each other, or reinforce their positions. Americans building up for another attack, which the main body of that is sitting right here. And the Arab states building up forces to prepare for a said attack. And that was it for the turn. The new thing for this turn is drones gain the attack ability. From this point on, drones have weapons on them, and they can be used to attack ground forces, as well as provide the ground units that ability to ignore terrain penalties. So, drones are increasingly becoming a very important component of modern warfare. So, we'll come back with the next turn recap. Alright, we're at fall of 2006, and this will be a pretty quick update because not a lot of attacks happened. In Iraq, it was just Americans doing cruise missile strikes and B-52 raids. Got a couple hits out of it. Same thing in Afghanistan, just cruise missile strikes and B-52 raids. The main thing that pretty much everyone did this turn was the nations that are capable of drones, they just upgraded their drones to be, instead of just scout drones, be attack drones. And that was pretty much it for the turn. The United States moved its next batch of infantry towards Afghanistan, so next turn all that will land. And everyone, with the exceptions of Russia, China, and Germany, are still upgrading their stuff. There's America's next wave of upgrades, and that's about it. So we'll come back next round to see what everyone did. We're spring of 2007, and well, the real thing going on is the United States started building a nuclear missile silo on the west coast, and the United States dropped a big surge of troops in Afghanistan. Dropped 12 infantry, 2 mechanized, 2 artillery. So it is almost guaranteed that the United States is going to be making some sort of offensive this coming turn. Question is, where? They got Farah, Kandahar, Kabul, or Eastern provinces. Could be any one of those or a combination of those. So it'll be interesting to see where America attacks this coming turn. And over in Iraq, it is getting pretty close to America's probably going to be launching an offensive in Iraq as well pretty soon, because they've got pretty sizable stack built up in Baghdad. So the American offensive in Iraq is going to be sooner rather than later. So we shall see if it's this turn or not. So we'll come back with what happens in Afghanistan. It is fall 2007, and in Iraq, the United States just continuing to build up its upgrade and build up its forces. Although the American offensive in Iraq is going to be coming pretty soon, because it's more or less finished with upgrades, and this last turn the United States produced almost exclusively infantry, so that's a pretty good sign that an American offensive in Iraq is coming sooner rather than later. The Ospreys on their return trip to the West Coast to get more infantry. Speaking of the West Coast, the United States completed its nuclear missile silo, so now it can nuke anyone on the board, anywhere, anytime it wants. Not that it's going to do that, but main action was in Afghanistan. The United States pushed out and took Kabul and the Eastern province. So the United States now has complete control over northern and central Afghanistan. The only thing still left in Arab state hands is southern Afghanistan. Arab states thought about counterattacking really hard, but decided against it because in order to retake a territory, they'd pretty much have to concentrate all or majority of their forces to overwhelm the just sheer American firepower, and then they'd take substantial losses doing it, and then the very next turn they just lose it because America would counterattack and immediately retake it. And ultimately, the Arab states win by playing for time. So they can win just by playing defense, and on defense they have the greatest firepower, so they opted to just play defense, at least for now. So we'll see what happens in the coming turns, whether or not the Arab states counterattack in Afghanistan or not. Same thing with Iraq. But that was it for the turn, pretty quick. So we'll come back with the next update. Alright, we're at the fall of 2008. And the only action was in Iraq, where the U.S. pushed out and took Nineveh. But I think the United States has finally built up enough mass in both Iraq and Afghanistan to go on a general offensive across the board. Granted, the United States has been doing that fairly regularly in Afghanistan, but you can see the American buildup is, I think, substantial enough to take the last two provinces of Afghanistan. So we'll see what happens, if next turn is the big American push or not. So we'll see you at the end of that. Alright, it's the spring of 2009, and it had a lot of fighting. The United States went on offensive across the board, Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq, it was highly successful. Took Al-Anbar, central Iraq, and Amara. So it's just these last three southern provinces that the Arab states still hold in Iraq. So looking pretty dire for the Arab states in Iraq. However, the opposite is true in Afghanistan. The United States attacked Kandahar and Farah, and it did not go well for the United States. They took substantial losses. Granted, the Arab states took substantial losses as well, but the United States is going to need some massive reinforcements if it wants to take Afghanistan. And they only have 3 turns to do it, so so as it stands right now, it's looking like the United States will take Iraq, but it's kind of looking like the United States will not take Afghanistan. So we'll see what happens in the future. So we'll come back next turn. Alright, it's the fall of 2009, and the United States kind of surprised everybody by going on a full-on offensive across the board. Well, not so much in Iraq, that was kind of expected, but they attacked in Afghanistan too, which was surprising. But the U.S. went on a full offensive in Iraq, took these 2 southern provinces, so all that's left that is in the Arab states' hands is Basra. That is all that's left. And then, over in Afghanistan, the U.S. surprised everyone. They concentrated all their forces and attacked Kandahar and took it pretty handily. So now all that's left in Arab states' hands is Farah. And well, there's only 2 turns left in the Afghan war, so who knows? Maybe America might pull it off. Who knows? Because the Ospreys can't get back to the West Coast and back to Afghanistan before the Afghan war is over, the U.S. is just pulling its AACs back and probably send them back to the West Coast because they can't do anything for Afghanistan right now. And yeah, that was pretty much it. So we'll come back next round and see what happens. Alright, we're at the spring of 2010, and the United States made a raid into the last Arab state held province in Iraq. Did quite a bit of damage. They took out like 25 infantry or something like that. But I think that is just a raid to keep their numbers down. The United States is still holding off till it gets a little more mass behind it before it commits to actually taking it. But bigger news is the United States has completely secured Afghanistan. It has completely taken it completely over. So the United States just needs to hold it for one more turn, and they'll won at least the Afghanistan portion of it. The Iraq portion is still ongoing. So we'll come back and see if the United States is able to hold on to Afghanistan. Next turn. Alright, it is fall of 2010. And the U.S. only made one attack. Hit the Arab states here in Basra. They didn't take it, but they weren't really trying to take it per se. They were just trying to, it was more of a raid, just trying to kill units, and they did that very well. Killed 25 units. For about loss of only about 11 units of their own. And that was the United States' only attack. Over here in Afghanistan, the Arab states attacked and tried to take Herat, and it was a complete disaster. The foreign fighters for the Arab states were completely wiped out, for the loss of only 2 militia for the United States. So Afghanistan remains securely in the United States' hands. And the event for the turn is the Afghan war is over. So the United States has won the Afghan half of the war. So that'll be pretty big for the U.S. because now the U.S. can start transferring all this stuff to Iraq and make their job in Iraq a lot easier, because now they're fighting only a one-front war instead of a two-front. So that's going to free up a lot of American assets for Iraq. Make the Arab states' life a hell of a lot harder. So we'll come back next turn with an update on that, how the Iraq war is going. And we'll see you then. Alright, we're in the spring of 2011, and the only conflict going on right now is in Iraq. The United States made another raid on Basra. Destroyed like 34 units or something like that, but opted to retreat again, because once again just opting to bleed numbers, not take it yet, It's 2 turns left in the conflict, so probably this turn and the next turn, the United States will commit to actually taking it. But as you can see, Iraq is filling up with U.S. forces. With Afghanistan being over, the U.S. was able to pull a lot of stuff over from Iraq, from Afghanistan and pour it into Iraq. Looks like the actual Arab states, they're pretty much staying out of the war, just letting the foreign fighters do all the fighting. The United States pretty much completely destroyed the actual Arab state military, so it's looking like the Arab state are refraining from combat with the U.S. and just spending these last couple turns rebuilding their military. Because immediately after this is World War III, so having to build up some kind of military to fight in that conflict and just letting the foreign fighters, which are free, do all the fighting for them. So, the only other thing going on is the British start construction of a super fleet carrier. And then the United States moves some assets back to Guam, because all that is right there. But that's pretty much it, so we'll do the next round and come back with an update. Okay, it is fall of 2011, and the United States has taken the last province in Iraq, so the United States now has full control over all of Iraq. The Arab state foreign fighters opted not to attack this turn, opted to wait for all the wounded from America's attack on this province to heal up so they'd have maximum force to attack somewhere, because they only had to take one province back, and they'll deny the United States the victory point. But that could be a tall order, because, as you can see, the United States has a substantial amount of forces in Iraq. So, other than that, England is one turn away from completing its fleet carrier, its super fleet carrier. But other than that, that was it. We are on the last turn of the War on Terror. The United States has won Afghanistan, and they're one turn away from winning Iraq, so we'll see what happens next turn, and see who wins the War on Terror. Alright, we've come to the end of the War on Terror, and the United States has won. They have secured both Iraq and Afghanistan. The last battle, the Arab states tried to do a last-ditch attack into Kurdistan and to take it, and well, it didn't go so well for them. They went in there with 23 infantry, and they lost 14, and only managed to take out 1 infantry and 1 drone on the American side. So, granted, the Arab states have pretty sizable force built up sitting on the wings, but they decided to preserve those units for World War III, which is coming up next, because it's going to be stretched pretty thin, because when World War III starts, the Arab state battlefield goes from just Iraq to, or is limited to just Iraq. It'll expand to the entire Middle East and Africa, so it's going to need those built-up forces to cover that much larger area. So it decided to preserve those units for World War III, sacrifice Iraq in the meantime. Well, not completely, it still fought for it, but primarily used its foreign fighters, which it got for free to do the fighting. Yeah, even though Arab states, even though their supply lines were much closer, Iran and Egypt, than with the United States is having to pull everything either from West Coast all the way across the Pacific or the East Coast, but American air and logistical power was just too much for the Arab states, and they were able to secure the victory. So we'll reset the board for World War III because some scopes get traded out, some new units come out, and then pretty much everyone gets a free strategic move. So we will move on to the next scenario, which is World War III, and then that will be it for the Terra Bellum series. So we'll see you then.